Hi, everybody. Today I am with Lynn Bujnak, who is the conference minister of the Vermont Conference of the United Church of Christ. And thank you very much, Lynn, for talking to me today. Yeah. So please tell us a little bit. A lot of folks know that I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, but they probably don't really know, what is the United Church of Christ and how are all these denominations different? So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, first of all.
Sure, I'd be glad to. The United Church of Christ is often a name that's not well recognized in Vermont and in the Northeast states because most of our churches continue to call themselves congregational church. So, but most of the congregational churches in Vermont are part of the United Church of Christ, but certainly not all. This is a denomination that was born back in 1958 of four predecessor denominations, and really came of age in the 60s, which means that this is a denomination that actually has a long history and bent towards social justice. And that's one of the ways in which that's a distinctive, I guess, mark of the UCC is the understanding that our faith causes us to be involved in issues of justice. Key values for the United Church of Christ include I think our vision statement right now is united in Christ's love, a just world for all. So there you see that justice coming out again. The other two things that I think the denomination is really known for is a sense of radical welcome and hospitality. There's a phrase that gets used in many of our churches that's no matter who you are or where you are on your journey, you're welcome here. And so that's a very important value for us. And I think another one that's very important to us is this idea that God is still speaking, that there's, it's not that we got through the book of Revelations and that was it, but that God is still active and alive and still talking to us as we seek to respond with our lives. So that's the UCC in a nutshell.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And that's, what you've touched on, drew me to the UCC, the idea about social justice, the emphasis on social justice, but also especially the radical hospitality, the inclusion. I mean, part of my story is that I was originally ordained in the Presbyterian Church, and then they actually have prohibitions against the full participation of LGBTQ people. And so, when I finally was able to really embrace, who I am and come out of the closet, I no longer had, I was no longer welcome really in the Presbyterian Church. But coming to not only to Vermont, did I find refuge as a state, but the United Church of Christ has been, a haven for me, and it has been so wonderful to be welcomed and to be accepted for who I am and to have my gifts appreciated. So it means so much to me.
And it means a lot to us as well. So we have a tendency to pick up some incredibly fine ministers because another denomination is not able to or does not accept the fully who you are. So.
Yes. Yeah. So, how many congregations are there in the? So the conference is that's kind of church speak, right? What does the conference encompass, and how many congregations are part of it?
Okay, the conference encompasses the state of Vermont, so that's our sort of area. There's in our denomination there are local churches which are considered the most essential part of way of being church. And then there are a little bit wider geographic areas that are called associations, and then finally a conference. And so we're the Vermont Conference. At the moment, we have 134 congregations. they're spread all the way, in the state, up in the Northeast Kingdom and in populous areas and in a lot of the rural areas as well. Many of our congregations are quite small, and they've been that way for, like 200 years. So this isn't necessarily a new thing. It's just who they are and how they are in their communities.
And some of our congregations are actually like, they're joined together with other denominations. Is that right? That was something that was kind of unusual to me when I got up here to Vermont. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. We have a number of congregations that are either what we call union or federated. And those are churches that the most common one is between the United Methodists and UCC. That's most of the churches that are federated in that way. Sometimes the Unitarian Universalists are in there somewhere, and in a couple of our churches, the other partner is Baptist, American Baptist. So, and that makes for some interesting variety, and how churches figure out how to relate to both denominations or three denominations. But for the most part, these are also churches that have become extremely essential in their local communities.
And what are some of the contributions that our congregations make to their communities?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. It's most of our churches you're going to find somewhere around the center of the town, because they were often the first church to be formed in a new community. We have, it's often our church, or maybe a combination of churches, that host the food shelves and the clothing banks. Many of our congregations are holding free community dinners. Some of our congregations are engaged in laundry love, which is a way of reaching out to people and making sure that they have money in order to wash and dry their clothes, and also at the same time keeping them company. And a number of our churches are also engaged in a summer lunch program, so that kids who are normally able to eat because they're doing that in school, and in the summer, food insecurity is much more prevalent. So several of our churches are working on that program as well. So that's a little taste of, and I guess the other thing I would say is it's also often the case that our pastors are really seen as pastors to the entire community, particularly in rural areas where they may be the only church, or maybe one of two. So a lot of the things that happen in a community, either that are full of joy or sometimes full of mourning, they often happen in those buildings. And so there's the old term of that used to be meeting house. And indeed, a lot of our churches are still considered that in their communities.
And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you in this particular video is because the conference headquarters is actually in Randolph in Orange County. So what happens? There's a building that is the headquarters, but what happens in the building, and who are the folks that join you and that help support the conference?
Sure. In our conference office, there's a number of things. There's physical resources for churches, but most of what we do is supporting our pastors and our congregations. That includes myself as conference minister, Paul, who is our associate conference minister, and then Jesse, who is our administrator. So one of the things that happens in our office is making sure that churches who are needing pastors are getting the appropriate information that they need in order to do that, and that pastors who are seeking congregations are also getting the resources that they need. You might consider us to be in some ways sort of a matchmaker, although we don't make the match, the local congregation, the pastor does, but that's a very important thing that happens out of this office. You know, we support congregations through a number of programs. We currently have some of our pastors have been trained as vitality coaches and are working with other congregations who want those kind of programs. You know, we're always on the horizon to say, you know, what new expression of church might God be calling forth. So that's work that comes out of this office as well. Lots of work to support clergy with things like communities of practice. And often it's not just, you know, Paul and I being able to be available to pastors. We're currently running a Tuesday Zoom for our interested pastors, just to talk about, you know, what it's like to suddenly find yourself not in your building and not face to face with your parishioners, but somehow needing to do all of these things virtually. And so, you know, sharing best practices around that and simply giving support, and that's a big part of what we're doing right now. We also farm a link with the wider denomination so we can make our folks aware of programs that are available to our local congregations. For instance, at this point, there is some money available, some grant money, some very low income, low interest loans as well that are available through the denomination because of hardships that are experienced in the midst of the COVID virus. So, you know, we've got making that information aware is an important matter as well. So that's some of the things we do here.
Yeah, that's great. You know, probably folks have heard across the country about some churches trying to meet in person, but I think it's true that most of our congregations here in the UCC in Vermont switched to kind of remote worship and haven't gone back. Is that right? To meet?
Yeah, the vast majority of our churches are doing that, and I think the most common thing that we hear folks say is there are many people in our churches who really fall right into the category of most at risk. And so, you know, sort of the loving thing to do at this point is not to risk their health and their lives until it's safe for all of us to be able to go back to worship. So and we have a couple of churches, maybe a handful of churches that are doing some outdoor socially distanced worship in the summer when it's possible for that to happen. But for the most part, our churches are meeting virtually.
Okay. And how about the other big cataclysmic thing that has happened in the country recently is the protests and rallies around racial justice. And you mentioned earlier that the denomination has always been very justice oriented. How is that affecting the congregations in Vermont?
It's definitely affecting our congregations and our pastors. We're receiving a lot more calls for resources. And one of the things that I find really encouraging is that most of the time we talk about this as needing to understand racism, but more and more our congregations are coming to understand that that's not actually what's happening here. We need to deal with white privilege and white supremacy. And that gives me a lot of hope for the ability to actually move forward with some genuine change. So we've got congregations that are engaging in various forms of studies and sort of reflection groups. A number of our congregations are holding some form of rally literally every Sunday, particularly up in Burlington. There's a number of our churches and other denominational churches who are just keeping that understanding of Black Lives Matter going. That's currently the brochure or the banner that's on the conference center right now is Black Lives Matter. So this is a really important issue, and an issue that most of us are willing to face head on, and very hopeful that perhaps this time it will not get buried someplace, but actually lead to sustained change.
Yes, let's hope so, definitely. And I'm sure the UCC will lead the way as we have in other justice areas. So thank you very much for talking with me, and I'm sure I will see you again at some point. And yeah, so take care.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.